Okay. So, I know many educators today are worrying about Common Core, hoping for the best, that it will be implemented with fidelity, that the assessments will really be the kinds of next generation assessments that have been promised. Whether or not Common Core succeeds, whether or not it's implemented with fidelity and the tests are as good as some hope, I see three challenges looming on the horizon just beyond Common Core that I believe will have a far, far more profound impact on our work moving forward. I'd like to briefly introduce them. Number one, the commoditization of knowledge. How many of you are using Khan Academy in your classes, one way or another? Raise your hands. How many of you are planning on taking or have already taken a MOOC? Raise your hands. In a very, very short period of time, all human knowledge that we might want or need is going to be right there on the computer screen. For the first time in human history, we don't need a teacher to learn. You know, we teachers used to have the corner on the market, right? We were the only ones who had the papyrus reeds, the clay tablets, then those very expensive things called books, which became textbooks. No longer. You don't need those things to learn. You don't need the teacher to give that information to you. What does that mean moving forward? What is the role of a teacher, if not to impart knowledge? What is the purpose of school if you don't have to go to school to impart knowledge? Challenge one. Challenge two. The nature of work is changing fundamentally, radically, and at warp speed. I talked to Tom Friedman recently, the author of The World is Flat. He said he got one thing wrong in that book. I said, what? He said the pace of change. He had no idea how much more quickly these kinds of changes. I'm talking about the degree to which work is being either offshored or automated. Not just working class, not just assembly line, but highly skilled work. The kinds of careers middle-class Americans have aspired to for generations are disappearing. Law, 30% reduction in applications to law school. Because law has been commoditized for beginning people. Medicine, want to be a radiologist today? Forget about it. It's been automated and offshore. You'll never make back your loans. CPA, accounting, gone. What does that mean for our young people? What are they going to need to succeed? To have a rich and satisfying life in this new world? Challenge two. You combine these two challenges, you begin to understand that, in fact, the world no longer cares how much our kids know. That's a commodity. No competitive advantage in knowing more than the kid next to you, because that kid will Google it and figure it out. What the world cares about is what you can do with what you know. And that is a completely different and brand new education problem. Sure, you need content, but that's not enough. To do something with what you know, you need two other things: skill and will. So I want to talk a bit about skill and will. Skills, I think the Hewlett Foundation and all of you have already kind of figured out. How we assess those, how we teach those effectively, is another challenge. As many of you know, I wrote a book called The Global Achievement Gap, came out 4.5 years ago, about what I call the 7 survival skills. I don't care what list of skills you need, but we all understand increasingly the importance of skill. Well, let me tell you just a kind of a little story about what happened when that book came out, that I've been learning and thinking about since. Suddenly, I got invitations from all over the world to go speak to leadership audiences. Literally from Taiwan to Singapore, to Thailand, to Bahrain, from Spain to England to Finland, and again, literally from West Point to Wall Street. And I don't know how many states and conferences in between. And everywhere I went, the response was universal, was exactly the same around the world. This: yes, these are the skills, or some variation of them, that matter most. And over again, folks said to me, look, content's changing. Content's on the internet. What matters far more is what kids can do, not what they know. So I was feeling okay and sort of like I'd made a contribution, but then the other thing happened. I'm talking about the global economic collapse, where for the first time in American history, we saw a generation of kids coming home with a brand new BA degree in one hand, the ink barely dry, an average of $26,000 of debt in the other hand, and no jobs. We have for generations been saying to kids, key to a good life, go to school, go to college. What's wrong? All right, quick number in your head. What would you guess, real quick, what is the number of unemployed, the percentage of unemployed or underemployed recent college graduates? Take a guess. Anybody want to guess? About 54%. About half that group have jobs that require a BA. The other half have jobs that don't require a BA. Driving taxis, tending bar, don't pay college graduate wages. How are they going to pay back their debt? It's untenable. So I began to try to understand this problem. And a couple of things became more clear. Number one, all of those skills I just described, Hewlett Foundations describes, necessary but not sufficient. World's moving too quickly. There's a new set of capabilities that more and more employers are demanding. That's the capacity to innovate, to be a creative problem solver, or to bring new possibilities to life. At the same time, I learned something else. Maybe you guys already knew this. I didn't. I'm a recovering high school English teacher, as you know. What do I know about economics, right? But did you know that the American economy has, increasingly in the last 2 decades, become more and more dependent upon consumer spending as the engine of growth? 70% of our GDP has been based on consumer spending. Once upon a time, we were the number one manufacturer in the world. It was more than half of our economy. Today, we are the number one consumer in the world. Well, little problem. That consumption has, for decades, been increasingly fueled by debt. Not government debt, consumer debt. People going into debt. The savings rate in 2007 was minus 2%. Leading me to worry that, in fact, we've created an economy based on people spending money they do not have to buy things they may not need, threatening the planet in the process. That's an economy more and more economists are beginning to recognize is simply not sustainable. Not sustainable economically, not sustainable environmentally, not sustainable, I think, spiritually. But what's the option? Again, growing discussion about the need to educate young people to be the creative problem solvers that the world needs, that we become the country that solves more problems around the world that need solving, and in so doing, generate jobs and wealth, beginning with the problem of how to create a sustainable planet. So, we've always been known as a very innovative country. Why? We've got, until recently, good infrastructure, until recently, a liberal immigration policy, strong rule of law, availability of venture capital. What about our education system? Part of the problem, part of the solution. I ask an answer of questions so quickly you will not be able to Google it. What do Bill Gates, Edwin Land, the inventor of the Polaroid instant camera, Bonnie Raitt, the folk singer, and Zuckerberg of Facebook fame, all four have in common? I'm sorry, they were not college dropouts. They were Harvard college dropouts. That's different. That's very different. Steve Jobs, just an ordinary college dropout. Michael Dell, another ordinary college. I just love doing that to Harvard. Such a good time. So with this new work, I began to try to understand what must we do differently as parents, as teachers, as mentors, and as employers to develop the capabilities of many, many more young people to be creative problem solvers, to bring new possibilities to life. We're born curious, creative, imaginative. It is in the human DNA to innovate, to explore, to create. Until, as Sir Kenneth Robinson and others suggest, those qualities are simply schooled, or in some cases, parented, out of us. Well, how do we reverse that? That's the question I became really interested in. So I started interviewing a wide variety of young people in their 20s who were extraordinarily innovative. Some in science, technology, and engineering, some in the arts, some who were social entrepreneurs and innovators. I then studied what I called their ecosystem, trying to understand what enabled them to not have that creativity schooled out of them. What enabled them to develop the capacities to innovate, the dispositions. I interviewed all of their parents. I then asked each one of them, was there a teacher or a mentor who'd made a significant difference in their lives? Turns out most had had at least one teacher, rarely more than one. Teachers ranged from elementary school all the way to graduate school. I interviewed all of those teachers. And these were kids from both privilege and poverty, across the board. And I made what was for me a deeply troubling discovery, having interviewed those teachers. In every single case, the teachers that had made the greatest difference in the lives of these young innovators, be they from privilege or poverty, were outliers in their educational setting. Elementary, middle, high school, graduate school, all the way up the ladder. Then I visited those few schools, those colleges that are graduating innovators, new schools like the brand new MIT Media Lab, the Olin College of Engineering, the D School up the road here. And of course, I'd visited a number of your schools. And I began to realize that the kind of teaching I see from Reggio Emilia through New Tech High, High Tech High, Envision, Edvision, Expeditionary Learning, through these colleges, MIT Media Lab, Olin, D School, remarkably consistent and coherent. And what I've come to understand is that the culture of schooling, as we've known it for centuries and continue to replicate it, that culture of schooling is fundamentally and radically at odds with a culture of learning that creates the capacity to innovate in 5 essential respects, 3 of which will be pretty familiar for you. Culture of schooling reinforces and rewards individual achievement. That's how we grade and sort kids. Little problem, innovation is a team sport, as you well know. And as many of you already do, the teachers of young innovators build accountable teamwork into every single assignment. Number 2, the culture of schooling compartmentalizes knowledge and favors expertise. Well, that can be useful, except the little problem is innovation happens at the margins. It demands an interdisciplinary approach to problem identification and problem solving. Judy Gilbert, Director of Talent at Google, said to me, if there's one thing educators must realize is that problems can neither be understood nor solved within the bright lines of academic disciplines. Number 3, culture of schooling is a profoundly passive experience, as you well know. Maybe that's in fact where we learn to be such good little consumers. We kind of sit and get for a lot of our lives, except in your schools. And in other schools that emphasize innovation, where it's about creating, not consuming. Last 2 contradictions are more challenging, I think, for some of us. Culture of schooling penalizes failure. That's what F's are all about. We reward compliance. And in so doing, we create a risk-averse culture for both kids and teachers. But here's the rub. Innovation demands risk-taking. Innovation demands that you make mistakes and learn from them. I went to IDEO up the road here, most innovative design company in the world. They told me their company motto is fail early and fail often. Heck of a way to run a company. But when you explore it, you understand that by that they mean there is no innovation without trial and error. Research and development, fancy word for trial and error. I went to the D School. We were sitting around talking about the whole process of grading. They said, yeah, we're kind of thinking F is the new A. I wouldn't recommend taking that back just yet. It needs a little work. But, by that they meant the kid who'd taken a risk and, quote, failed has probably learned a lot more than the straight A student who never took a risk in his or her life. That's the way they got straight A's. Finally, I talked to a young woman at the Olin College of Engineering. She said to me, we don't even talk about failure here. We talk about iteration. My new favorite word, iteration. Idea of taking what you've learned in one effort and what worked, what didn't, and you applying it after you've reflected carefully on your next effort or iteration. It's one of the huge values, I think, of digital portfolios. The first piece of evidence I saw from digital portfolios came from a High Tech High website where I saw a student in her digital portfolio reflecting on the writing that she'd been doing and what was working and what wasn't and how she was trying to transform her opening paragraphs and then showing an example of a dramatically better paragraph, all through iteration and reflection. You've got to have both together. But here's the last rub, the last contradiction, most challenging of all. Culture of schooling relies heavily on extrinsic rewards and punishments to motivate learning. Carrots and sticks, A's and F's, money for good grades. But in every single case, whether they were from privilege or poverty, what I learned is that these young innovators are far, far more intrinsically motivated, wanting to make a difference more than they wanted to make a lot of money. And when I went back to try to understand what had their parents and teachers done to reinforce and support that intrinsic motivation, because it became so clear how important it was as we think about the world of innovation. When I went back, I discovered that both parents and teachers had very intentionally encouraged three things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraging more discovery-based, exploratory play, less structured time, fewer toys, toys without batteries, limiting screen time. Teachers bringing an element of play into their assignments. Ed Carrier, teaching smart product design to engineering students at Stanford, talked about the importance of bringing what he called whimsy into every single assignment. Parents then consciously and deliberately trying to create a set of opportunities for their kids to discover what is it that they were really interested in. What's their passion? Buffet of opportunities, and listening carefully for that kid's real interest. Understanding that for a young person to find and pursue a real interest is the heart of real motivation, of grit, is the reason why somebody will put in 10,000 hours to get very good at something, is the reason why somebody will recover from a setback, because they're pursuing a real interest. And they understood that, interests change, they morph, they evolve. Teachers the same, building time into every class for students to pursue a real interest. Ask a real question of his or her own. Get better at something. Create their own investigations. So as these young people grew older and evolved, their passion became a deeper sense of purpose. That sense of purpose was simultaneously a more mature expression of their passion, also an expression of forms of adult play. They all talked about their work as play. But fundamentally, they wanted to make a difference or give back. And that was explicitly because both parents and teachers had reinforced the idea that we are not here on this earth only for ourselves, that we have a responsibility to in some way give back or make a difference. Okay, so I want to explore with you what are the implications for our work, because you all are already doing so many of these things so well, teaching the new skills that matter most, providing opportunities for students to create rather than consume. But I think there are a couple of pieces that I believe are at the edges of our work that we need to turn to. First and foremost, understanding that the rationale of our work is not simply the best of the progressive tradition, John Dewey and others. That's a powerful rationale. But the other rationale is that you are creating a generation that will solve the problems of the world that most need solving. And in so doing, create a stronger, more vibrant economy and a more employable future for themselves. In other words, I'm urging you to embrace the economic need, not just the desirability for the work you're doing. And I'm urging you then to take new steps in forming partnerships. As you think about the digital portfolios, how many of you are doing digital portfolios in some way, shape, or form? Most of you. I thought so. Okay. So here's the next step, perhaps. How many of you are auditing your digital portfolios, bringing in outsiders? I'm talking about employers and college teachers to look at the quality of work. Raise your hands. To me, that is the next step with digital portfolio work. How do you know good is good enough? So how can we develop performance standards for our graduates that meet the criteria of both college and work readiness? Because if we're able to do that, we're creating the next and best generation of accountabilities. It's formative assessment based on a body of student work. And increasingly, that's what the world of employers want. They're less and less interested in, where'd you get your, your diploma? Let me see your GPA. They don't care. They say, show me. Show me what you can do. Show me your work. So I think we have to prepare our young people for that world and see to what extent we can meet those standards. As we think about that, I think we need to apply the same set of kind of assessment tools to our own work. How are we going to counter this insanity of judging teachers by a bubble test score in May. It's demeaning the profession. It's profoundly wrong. We must, in my view, advocate for accountability 2.0 for students in terms of looking at a body of work, but also for ourselves. I want to see every teacher have a digital portfolio. Videotapes from lessons, samples of student work, outlines of units of study, interviews with students describing how they were engaged and motivated as learners. And I want to see us begin to get into the habit of peer review of digital portfolios of one another's work. We have to show the way. We have to show there's a better way to assess students and a better way for us as professionals to hold ourselves and one another accountable. Last thought before I give you a chance to talk to each other and have a conversation. How can we continue to strengthen this idea of motivation? I know many of you already do project-based learning, challenge-based learning, discovery-based learning, but let me just throw out an idea to play with. How many of you know about the Google rule? Raise your hands. You go to Google to work, you have permission to play on company time 1 day a week. 20% time, it's called. Google's not the first. 3M has been doing it for decades. Gore Associates, others. What if we made a Google rule for every classroom in America? What if we told every student when they started school, you're going to have 20% of your time to work on a project of your choice, to ask a question, to design an investigation, or simply to learn more about something or get better at something that interests you. And the accountability is in your digital portfolio, and we're going to sit down and talk with you every few weeks about the work in your digital portfolio. And at the end of the semester, we're going to sit down with you and reflect on what is it that you've learned in this 20% time, how are you going to apply what you've learned, and set new learning goals. Skill and will. The skills are not enough. The will, the motivation to learn, is incredible. So finally then, I ask you, how much play, passion, and purpose is in your work? How much risk-taking is in your work? And how can you bring more of that into your classrooms and be models for what it is we need all students to embrace?